I'm Mahdi Shaheeb Sher. My website is www.shaheeb.com. I think one of my interests in the world is the 5 year Ukraine war. I think that we have had the Ukraine war for the past 5 years now. It is a long, protracted war. It has been going on for a considerable period of time. I think longer than expected by most people. I think when the Ukraine war was first started, it was probably expected to last for maybe a few months, maybe 8 months, or a year or two. But actually, to look on the Ukraine war as it stands now, it's been a 5 year war, 6 years in February. So I think that the Ukraine war is a very long drawn out war. It seems to be quite a serious war for being quite a longer than expected duration, occupying a longer than expected duration. I think that the Ukraine war is, by all manner, one of the longest wars we've had in Eastern Europe for the past 30 or 40 years. If you look at the duration of this war, it's 5 years. That's almost half a decade. I think when you compare that to other wars we've had in Eastern Europe, the area of Europe and Eastern Europe, then you can see that there's not many wars we've had in Eastern Europe, um, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So I think the Ukraine war is quite a significant war in the historical sense. I think the fact that it's half a decade, and it involves Russia as well as a protagonist. So I think that Russia, um, as directly involved in the war, is obviously very serious as well. Because usually with Eastern European wars, I think Russia doesn't like to involve itself directly because of its past association with Eastern Europe and its historical background with Eastern Europe. So I think that the Eastern European area is quite sensitive for Russia, and typically it doesn't like to be directly involved. I think in the past, with maybe the Bosnia War, we've had maybe Yugoslavia, which was a kind of a puppet of the Russian regime. I think they were involved in an Eastern European war. I think that was the last war in Eastern Europe, and I think that that's that was the last war we had in Eastern Europe before the Ukraine war, and the Bosnia War was a serious war as well, because I think when you look at the fallout of the Bosnia War, excuse me, when you look at the fallout of the Bosnia War, it has been a relatively serious war. The Bosnia War, I think, involved a lot of war crimes itself as well as Ukraine, which also involves war crimes. But I think the Bosnia War was very serious for its ethnic cleansing and its genocide, and I think that this was very important for the nature of Russia's involvement in Eastern Europe, propping up Yugoslavia and also Yugoslavia's very heavy involvement with Bosnia, um, Croatia and Herzegovina, and I think that that region was subjugated by Russia and Yugoslavia, and I think with this perspective, the Bosnia was some kind of a last testament of Russia in Eastern Europe. It was a last testimony of Russia in Eastern Europe, where they were kind of withdrawing from Eastern Europe in much of the bulk of its presence. And I think that Bosnia was pretty much kind of a withdrawal by Russia, with much of its military position in Europe and especially Eastern Europe. Um, and I think withdrawing back to Russia with the Bosnia War is pretty much how the military position of Russia stands in Eastern Europe and the rest of Europe. So I think that's the significance of Bosnia and the Bosnia War. It was kind of a scramble to maintain its military discipline in Eastern Europe, especially with its kind of maneuver into Europe. So I think that the Bosnian War was quite important. And I think, in a similar respect, the Ukraine War is also, in a similar way, quite important as well. Because in this respect, with the Ukraine war, I think Russia is directly involved, not so much involved through Yugoslavia or a third party, but maybe directly involved. So I think that this is quite important because it shows that Russia is taking a very heavy stance with this. It's taking it very seriously, and I think that in all probability, I think that excuse me, I think in all probability, Russia is determined to conclude the war in Ukraine in its favour without losing any further position within Eastern Europe. And I feel that Russia does have a big position in Eastern Europe. It has a strong presence in Eastern Europe and a very large presence in Eastern Europe. So I think the Ukraine war is another gamble for Russia to maintain its position in Eastern Europe. So I think Russia is taking some risk with the Ukraine war. And I think it is very serious about the Ukraine war. But I think the ultimate consequence of the 5 year Ukraine war is that it's turned Russia into a war criminal with the International Criminal Court. I think that because of its war crimes in Ukraine, because of its very fierce fighting and very serious position with the Ukraine war, because of its very aggressive nature of its military offensive in Ukraine, it has conducted war crimes in Ukraine against the civilians, but against Ukraine itself as well. I think there are a number of war crimes that Russia has been convicted of when it comes to the Ukraine war, and there's multiple war crimes, not just one war crime or an isolated war crime. There's numerous war crimes that have indicted Russia as a war criminal by the International Criminal Court, which of course is a European body of huge renown and respect. I think it's renowned for being very serious when it comes to war crimes. And I think if the International Criminal Court has determined there to be a serious issue against Russia and has categorized Russia as a war criminal with its war crimes, with the Ukraine war, then that is, of course, a very serious issue in terms of how the global world sits with this, because it is a heavy conscience that the world is having to witness this very closely. The Ukraine war is a very public war. It's in the media 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's kind of portrayed in detail on a very daily basis. So that's the nature of this conflict. It is very much a daily record of a war that is being engaged by Russia for an unknown reason, an undeclared reason. This is a war that was started in a very Thunderbirds fashion, where Russia invaded Ukraine in a very Thunderbirds type of manner, where the tanks rode into Ukraine. I think in a very haphazard, very derogatory, and a very shocking and quite shocking manner. I think for Russia to invade Ukraine in the way that it did is a very serious issue, because I don't think Russia has invaded an Eastern European country like this since maybe the Soviet era, when it invaded the Eastern European states and nations with the Soviet Union. I think the aggressive nature of its invasion is similar to the Soviet Union style of how Soviet Union entered the theatre of Eastern Europe, entered Europe and the Eastern theatre. So I think it is aggressive in a very Soviet way, that the way that Russia simply, without warning, without a, without so much of a warning or a excuse me, without so much of a warning or a clear terminology of its contention with Ukraine, of its definition of its hostility, or maybe a preparation for its misconduct with Ukraine or its disagreement with Ukraine. There was no build up to the Ukraine war. There was no concurrence of any kind of disagreement with Ukraine. There was no outstanding issues or disturbance. There was simple invasion with tanks rolling into Ukraine through Belarus, and I think that with the supply lines less than 100 kilometers away from Kiev, Russia was quite clearly in a strong position to quite in a strong position to take over Ukraine and perhaps end the war relatively quickly, which it failed to capitalize on. And I think that it decided to move to the southern sector of Ukraine for more of an entrenched position without threatening Kyiv in a direct manner. And I think that's been Russia's position in this, to create a protracted war for an entrenched position, to determine Russia's position within Eastern Europe as a firm position, as a disciplined but a firm position in Europe that can't be shaken. And I think this is something that has been clearly displayed. I think that Russia has displayed that it can't be shaken with the Ukraine war, despite the hundreds of billions of dollars of military aid that's been provided by the European Union, Europe, its Europe allies, and the United States of America. By these people, Ukraine has received a lot of armor as well, tanks, Leopard tanks from Germany and other European countries that also have Leopard tanks. So it has a large volume of Leopard tanks from Germany and its allies. It also has lots of artillery and ammunition to supply that artillery as well. And that's Ukraine's defensive entrenchment as well. That it's using artillery as its defensive position. And that's quite an entrenched position as well to counter Russia's kind of entrenched position. So I think Ukraine is doing very well to use artillery against Russia, and I think Ukraine can win win against Russia with artillery. I think if it was to sustain its daily ammunition and artillery bombardment against Russia and its entrenched positions, then it might be able to dislodge a few of them. And I think that that would be a very positive outcome with the war. That alone would be a positive outcome war. And I think that would be a job well done and a war well managed to use artillery to perhaps move the Russians back a bit. And I think that Ukraine does have enough artillery and enough in ammunition. It could prop up its ammunition a little bit so that it could perhaps use maybe 2,000 daily rounds a day against Russian positions. I think that's how many rounds it needs to use with its artillery, about 2,000 rounds a day. So I think that if it can maintain that level of bombardment and increase it as well, then it can perhaps put some pressure on Russia, and that would perhaps dislodge some of its entrenched soldiers there in Luhansk and Donetsk regions, the kind of regions it has in southern Ukraine. So I think that's quite important. But of course, what Russia has lost from this is the fact that it's now categorized as a war criminal. And no superpower in history has ever been categorized as a war criminal like this, except Russia. It is very defeatist and very humiliating for Russia to be categorized as a war criminal by the International Criminal Court for being very heavy handed and very aggressive in this Ukraine war. If you look at the Roman Empire or other empires, like perhaps kind of the French Empire or the German Empire or the Roman Empire or any other empire that has existed in Europe, as superpowers, they've always been strong enough to maintain their superpower status and position. But with Russia, it seems very strange that they're unable to manage their uh, position as a power in the world, and especially as a superpower in the world. Looking at the Soviet Union, one of the superpowers of the world, it conquered the world twice over. It dominated half of the world along with America. And we had the Cold War for a number of years with the Soviet Union. I think that the Russia as a state is militarily very advanced. It has over 1 million tanks. It has a lot of soldiers as well. It has a large military budget compared to its GDP as well. It's invested a lot in its military over the past decade or two. And it's very firm in its military position in Europe and throughout the world. It can readily deploy its military within a 24-hour notice period. So I think it has a capability to strike whenever it feels threatened. And I think that is important as well. It's also built military alliances with China and various other powers as well. So I think that Russia militarily is building up its power and its position in the world, and it is poised to strike whenever it feels threatened. And I think as a power in the world, it seems slightly disturbing that it's now being categorized as a war criminal, because that obviously reduces its status as a power in the world. It's now a war criminal in the world, not just a power in the world, Russia in the world, but it's a war criminal in the world. And that is very demeaning. It is very humiliating to have to admit to being a war criminal in the world. I think the only other countries that have been war criminals in the world are Libya, and maybe Saddam Hussein has been categorized as a war criminal as well. But I think that Russia and Vladimir Putin to be categorized as war criminal is something very humiliating to have to deal with, especially as a military power in the world. And I think this is having an effect on its military position in the world. For Russia now to be categorized as a war criminal is to state that its military has now been subjugated to the status not as a power in the world and as a superpower that it aims to be in the world. I think Russia does aim to rival its Soviet Union days and to regain its superpower status in the world. I think that's what Russia aims to do. I think that is a little bit clear. But I think that Russia does envision a world where it does have significant military power bases in the world, significant military power in the world, and it does want to retain its power as a superpower in the world, not just as a power, but as a superpower, perhaps. And for it now to be a war criminal is kind of a huge setback, because I think this throws its military into discord, its state into discord with the Russian government, all of its politics and its political opposition. It obviously discredits the President Vladimir Putin, who might appear to be a lunatic with his position with the Ukraine war. This is very unfortunate because I do think he's lost a lot of credibility with his with this Ukraine war. I think there's no reason for Russia to be at war with Ukraine. So the fact that it's had a 5-year Ukraine war without much cause or any reason is very discredits Vladimir Putin to a significant level. And I think this does no favors to Europe either, or to America or the rest of the world. So I think that we are looking at an unfortunate situation in Ukraine, where it's gone on for over 5 years, um, and it's likely to continue for maybe another year or two, possibly. So I think that Russia as a war criminal has lost a lot of its prestige, a lot of its political credibility. It's lost a lot of its political power and its diplomacy in the world. I think, especially with its diplomacy, I think that's taken a big hit. I think the fact that Russia has taken a diplomatic blow with this is quite unfortunate as well. And I think that Russia can only um, deal with this the best it can. Now that it's a war criminal in the world, it's probably going to be a war criminal for at least 50 years, maybe 50 to 70 years. So I think for it to be a war criminal in the world now is a very serious situation for a former superpower and for a Soviet Union, for the former Soviet Union and a former Soviet superpower to be relegated to a war criminal status, to a pariah nation and a pariah state is very dangerous in the world. It's very unpredictable, it's very unstable, and I think that it does raise some alarm bells to see that there is this perhaps a situation which might not be very favourable. I think for superpowers to become war criminals is a very elevated situation, a risky situation, an elevated risk situation. It could be a dangerous situation. So I think that Russia does need to sit back a bit, withdraw perhaps from its aggressive military posture, and to perhaps engage in more diplomatic reason with the world, perhaps engage in more diplomacy effort. I think this would be a better option than to go down in any further kind of military escalation, especially now that it's a war criminal. So I think that if Russia is to be a war criminal for the next 50 years, especially as a former superpower in the world, then the world is perhaps on the brink again with some kind of a military escalation of some kind. It could include a nuclear conflict on a small scale, perhaps, on a regional basis. But I think that some military escalation could be conceivable because of this war criminal status that Russia now has as a former superpower that's perhaps had to take this damage. So I think that is very concerning. And I think that's one of my concerns with Russia and Russia as a war criminal. Thank you very much.